Virtua Fighter was an amazing gaming experience when it got released into arcades. The polygon graphics, simplified controls, and brilliant gameplay proved to be an instant hit with gamers everywhere. And if there is one rule that all developers follow, it's this one. When a game is successful, make another, and get it out quick. The release dates between Virtua Fighter and Virtua Fighter 2 seemed so close. Just over a year later, it hit arcades, and the amount of improvements in the game were striking. Virtua Fighter 2 was developed in conjunction with the Sega Model 2 arcade system board, which was introduced in 1993. To achieve the game's filtered, texture-mapped characters and environments, Yu Suzuki sought the expertise of Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin were experts in rendering realistic 3D environments, used specifically for combat pilot training, and were well versed in the use of texture mapping technology. Sega were very interested in acquiring the license to use that same technology, and they approached Lockheed Martin to see if a deal could be struck. They charged $2 million for the use of their texture mapping chip, part of a flight simulation system that had an overall cost of $32 million. Although Sega initially hesitated, Suzuki successfully persuaded them to invest in the chip for $2 million, after which he collaborated with his AM2 team to adapt it for video game applications. Utilising Lockheed Martin's technology, the AM2 team ultimately developed a graphics chip that could be produced at a cost of $50 each. This advancement enabled the incorporation of texture mapping for the characters in Virtua Fighter 2.
Fight! 1, ready, go! Fight 2, ready, go!
Additionally, to enhance character animations, Suzuki employed motion capture technology which had previously been restricted to the healthcare sector and had not been utilised in the video game industry before. The result of all of this development cost and investment made the Virtua Fighter 2 arcade cabinet a costly one, at approximately £6,000 or about £12,000 in today's money. But despite this huge cost, they still managed to shift about 40,000 units worldwide. The game was unmistakably a Virtua Fighter game. Even with a massive improvement on the visuals, it was instantly recognisable. And these visuals are jaw-droppingly gorgeous. Virtua Fighter looked superb in 1993, but Virtua Fighter 2 looked like it was from the future or something. Thanks to the motion capture used for the moves and super smooth silky 60 frames per second, this game was like nothing else really that had come before it. And I think even today, it still looks absolutely sublime. And when I was playing it for this video, it was the first time I have played it in about 20 years. And just like in 2004, I get goosebumps when seeing these visuals. This is one of those games that for me, always takes me back to my carefree younger days, and a time when arcades could still pull out the odd surprise here and there. I do often say some games are a product of the era, and it's easy to tell what year they were released. But with Virtua Fighter 2, it's hard to work out when it came out. And just think of this. This game is exactly 30 years old now. That might be older than some people who are watching this video. The sound was absolutely superb in this game, with bone-crunching slams and lots of great announcer speech work. It was pretty much exactly the same as Virtua Fighter, but then that was impressive as well, so why ruin a good thing?
Better run home to Mama now.
Fight 2, ready, go!
The gameplay still uses the standard 3-button controls, but there are some new moves for each character, and the controls had been made even sharper for this release. And by the way, the release I am playing is 2.1. This is a version I had heard about in arcades, but never seen, and once I had played it in emulation, it was always just a version I stuck with, so that's why it's used in this video. The roster of characters seen some new additions, with the new combatants having a more animated style of fighting, which was probably used to show off the glorious texture mapping and motion capture. But in terms of gameplay, I always favoured Pai or Lau as my go-to characters. I was not bad with either, and by this time, I was struggling to find the motivation to learn all new attacks and moves for loads of different fighters and lots of different games. Back in its prime, this game always had crowds around it in the arcades, and Virtua Fighter was cementing its place at the top of the 3D versus fighter mountain. And by this time, with 3D fighters gaining in popularity, people were starting to wonder when a 3D version of Street Fighter would come out, and others had simply forgotten all about Street Fighter 2. That was the true impact of this game, in my opinion. I did spend a little more on this game than I probably should have back in the day, but honestly, it was so addictive and just such a great fighter. The Sega Saturn was not even out in the UK yet when I played this in the arcades, but having seen Virtua Fighter on an imported Saturn just before Christmas '94, I did question if this game would be too much for the Sega Saturn, as the visuals are just such a massive leap forward. But hats off to Sega, as the port to the Saturn is very good in my opinion.
KO!
あなたには空腹が足らないわ。
The Saturn port of Virtua Fighter 2 had a troubled development. The arcade version had more moves than what the Saturn could cope with on a CD, and so a lot of the development time was spent on developing compression techniques in order to squeeze them all in. The Saturn also could not handle the same amount of polygons as the arcade at 60 frames per second, and so some clever visual trickery was employed, which did take advantage of one area of the Saturn that was better than the arcade machine: the texture mapping. The Saturn could handle 16 colours per polygon, as opposed to just a single colour on the arcade. And also, the backgrounds were replaced with some parallax scrolling backgrounds. And the end result is fantastic in my opinion, as this game looks glorious on the Saturn. It's not as impressive as the arcades, but for the home, I do not think anyone could have got this game looking any better in my opinion. By the time this came out in the Saturn in early 1996, I had packed my Saturn away and was favouring the PlayStation, and so I showed no interest in purchasing it. But a mate who had a Saturn did buy it on release, and for a few hours I was thinking about digging out my Saturn and buying a copy. But that didn't last long at all. And it's not the fault of Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn. I did play this several times over the next few months at its flat, and the versus sessions were always fiercely contested. I think why I declined to buy it was just the fact I was getting older and maturer as well. I no longer had to be the first kid on the block with the latest and greatest, nor was I interested in getting every AAA title I could get my hands on. And when playing the Virtua Fighter 2 arcade game in emulation, I mentioned how I always get goosebumps. Well, I get them on the Saturn version as well, but for a different reason. As it was round about 1996 that I started to fall out of favour with video games. I mean, I still played them, but by this time it was just a hobby and not a lifestyle or anything. I was maybe a little less enthusiastic about gaming than I had been even 2 years prior to this. And that's always sad, when part of your happy childhood dies and no longer has the same meaning to you as it once did. But enough of that sad stuff. Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn is one damn fine port, and again, apologies here for the interlacing, as I had some emulation problems when playing the game for the footage.
Fight! 2, ready, go!
If you play Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn for about 15 to 20 minutes, you will soon discover that it plays identically to the arcade. And with Sega being able to produce top quality ports onto the Saturn, it sometimes became a mystery as to why the console was a bit of a flop here in the UK. But I guess it's less about what Sega were doing with it and more what Sony were doing with the PlayStation, I guess. But I still rate this game on the arcade and the Saturn, and I highly recommend you to give either version a go if you have the ability to do so. And that was my look back at Virtua Fighter 2. If you like this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Virtua Fighter 2 on any format. And a massive thank you to all those who have commented and subscribed to my channel. Your feedback and support really does go a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of you, so it's a massive thank you from me. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.
Go, Tarin!